When you think of Legend of Zelda dungeons, if you're like me, then you think of locked doors, small keys, single screen puzzle rooms, combat challenges, new items, and boss battles. And as I've been running through my most recent playthrough of Goof Troop with my brother Drew, I started to notice all of these Legend of Zelda mechanics can also be found in Goof Troop. I started to make that connection in Stage 4, the stage from the clip before, because Stage 4 looks like The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. So I fired up A Link to the Past and played through the first few dungeons again to make sure I wasn't just inventing the similarities. After revisiting both games, Goof Troop is a different flavor of dungeon solving gameplay than A Link to the Past, but it definitely scratches that same itch. When you're playing these dungeon-like stages, what makes it fun, what keeps you engaged, is the hunt. At the start of the adventure, our hero comes upon a dungeon, temple, or island that holds the treasure we are seeking. After entering, our hero finds some paths guarded, other paths full of traps, and still other paths that need a special item or key to progress. Our search begins to master the dungeon, and our hero takes the time to solve the puzzles, fit the locks and keys together, and defeat the guards. Eventually, the treasure that we seek is within sight. But wait! A final test against a terrible beast! If you can brave this last battle, then you may leave with your prize and tell the tale another day. The biggest difference between Goof Troop and The Legend of Zelda is that Goof Troop is an adaptation from a cartoon. Goof Troop was a cartoon sitcom about a father Goofy and his son Max, and their antics with their neighbors, Pete, his wife Peg, and their kids PJ and Pistol. When streaming a play session of this game with my brother, we had a lot of fun asking people where they knew Goofy and Max from. Most knew them from their big movies, like a Goofy movie and an extremely Goofy movie. But a few people knew about them from Goof Troop. Like me, they watched the show as a kid. And a few were familiar with Max from other Disney movies and properties. This adaptation is what drives the biggest gameplay difference, the second playable character. Goof Troop was designed around two players, Goofy and Max, and then retrofitted so that a single player could play through each stage. This can make some of the puzzles trickier if you're playing alone, but this additional playable character is what makes this game stand apart from its inspiration. The plot for the game begins in a scene right from the show. Goofy and Max are out fishing with Pete and PJ, when Pete and PJ are kidnapped by pirates. Goofy rows after them, and they end up on Spoonerville Island, a place completely overrun by pirates. Determined to rescue their neighbors, Goofy and Max begin to explore the island. The game is made up of 5 stages that each take place in a different part of the island. The pirates feel right at home on the beach and in the pirate ship, and even in the forest. But in the middle of the game, the pirates feel more out of place when the stages are based on a castle or an underground theme. While Link wields a sword, combat in Goof Troop is more like MC Kids. It's downplayed and based around throwable items. This is where we get the difference between Goofy and Max. Max is faster on foot when he's not holding anything, but Goofy does more damage when throwing objects at enemies. Goofy can take out some enemies in one hit, whereas it takes 2 or more with Max. Goofy and Max can also pass objects to one another, taking advantage of one another's strengths. Send Max to run and get the barrels, pass them to Goofy, and then have Goofy hit the enemies. Catching enemy projectiles and throwing them back is important in boss fights, and it was good that my brother and I could practice this during regular gameplay as well. In The Legend of Zelda, doors are usually opened by solving a puzzle in that room, bringing a key to the locked door, or defeating all the enemies in that room. Doors and locks are handled a little different in Goof Troop. Goofy and Max each have a single inventory slot that can be filled with an item throughout the stages. Unless you're playing solo, then you have 2 inventory slots. While sometimes an obstacle is a locked door that needs a key, other times it may be a bridge that needs a plank of wood, or a chasm that you need a rope to cross. Items can help with combat, like using this hookshot to stun enemies, or navigation, like this candle that can help the player see in dark rooms. Like a Zelda dungeon, each stage has optional rooms or tasks that reward the player with fruit to restore their health, a ruby that will grant an extra life, and diamonds that will reward the player with a continue. There will often be a bit of backtracking that can happen as a player makes a mental map of each stage and connects each lock with its key as they chart a course through the dungeon. One big difference is that in Zelda dungeons, the whole dungeon is recontextualized after obtaining a key item that can be found there. One downside in Goof Troop is that after the first stage, the player has experienced most everything that the game has to offer, with very few new mechanics being introduced to the player. But the offset for this is that Goof Troop is a very short game, and before anything feels repetitive, the game is over. Most puzzles are straightforward, not in the solution, but in the presentation. While the lock and keys will require a mental map of the stage and a bit of backtracking, how to solve a puzzle is easily understood based on what is presented on the screen. Kick the blocks with stars to the tiles with stars. Press all the switches, or walk over the letters in a certain order. For the latter puzzle, it took me and my brother 2 tries to get the correct word from the given letters.
Wait, they're letters. N-O-E-P. Nope.
Okay, that's what we're doing first.
Nope.
Oh, nope, you gotta do O first. Open!
Open, oh. Okay, I got the P. Get the E, and I'll get the N.
At the end of every dungeon in The Legend of Zelda, you fight a boss. And at the end of every stage in Goof Troop, you will also fight a boss. In The Legend of Zelda, they pace the fight around when the boss reveals a weak spot, and sometimes they require the key item found in the dungeon. In Goof Troop, the pacing of the fights are based on how often the boss gives ammo to the player. This is a good way to slowly increase the difficulty as the player progresses. Stages 1, 2, and 5 have pirate-themed bosses, but the colored skeletons and worm-like bosses in Stage 3 and 4 just don't seem to fit in with the rest of the game. It feels like they only had 3 ideas for pirate-themed stages, and then they put in 2 additional stages that were more generic dungeon-themed because they really couldn't ship the game with only 3 stages. Because this game is so straightforward, and it's very short, this is one of the best games to play with someone who isn't very familiar with video games, or perhaps a younger player that wants to join in. I found that since the puzzles are so straightforward, passersby would stop and offer an idea or 2 on how to solve them. During our stream, my brother and I spent so much time on the last puzzle that my other 2 brothers arrived for the next part of the stream. And at one point, we had all 4 of us just staring at the last puzzle until eventually we solved it and moved on to the final boss. I've played this game a few times, but it was just this last time where I drew so many connections between this and The Legend of Zelda. Capcom would go on to develop some Legend of Zelda games for Nintendo, starting with the Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons for the Game Boy Color. Later they would do the Minish Cap for Game Boy Advance, and The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords Adventures, the first official Legend of Zelda multiplayer game. It's fun for me to think about the connection between Goof Troop and the multiplayer Legend of Zelda games, but the most important part of the game to me is how shareable it is with others. So if you get a chance to play it, make sure you have a buddy to share it with.